Today I'll be talking about a world divided by an agreement made in 1494. This map you can see is the Cantino planisphere from 1502. We don't know who made the map. It's called the Cantino planisphere because of Alberto Cantino, who smuggled the map out of Portugal for his client, the Duke of Ferreira, who wanted the latest map of the world. Now, the world was divided by this line, which runs down the center of the Atlantic, and there'll be more about, I'll talk more about that later. So we'll talk about spices. These were the most valuable trade commodity at this time, especially the aromatic spices of nutmeg and cloves, which came from the remote spice islands of eastern Indonesia. So the next map will show the trade route from eastern Indonesia. You may recognize this map. It came out in, I think, the 1980s, a NASA compilation of Landsat photos from space. So on the very easternmost part of the map, I'll move the pointer over there, is the location of the Spice Islands. And the main route is this one, the spice route up through the Middle East and across to the Mediterranean and then to Venice, which was the ultimate point in Europe where the spices arrived. Now the Spanish and the Portuguese on the Iberian Peninsula were jealous of the wealth of Venice, and since they were seafaring nations, both with coasts on the Atlantic, thought they should be able to sail to the Spice Islands and cut off this route across the Middle East and perhaps gain access to these valuable spices for themselves. So we'll go to the next slide. And we're back on our Cantino planisphere. So the Portuguese, the Portuguese spent 70 years exploring down the west coast of Africa. And in 1487, they were able to Bartholomew Dias reached the Cape of Good Hope and saw the route open to India. Now, in 1492, as you know, Spain, or Christopher Columbus on behalf of Spain, crossed the Atlantic and reached the island of Hispaniola. So this line down the middle of the Atlantic is what was brokered by the Pope, which was the Treaty of Tordesillas, which was in 1494 between Spain and Portugal. So they very conveniently divided the world in half, and any discoveries to the east of that line could be claimed by Portugal, and any discoveries to the west could be claimed by Spain. A few problems. First, neither of them could measure longitude, and it's hard to draw a line on water, but that was the case. So Spain and Portugal are now in a race to reach the Spice Islands, and we'll follow the Portuguese. So the image on the left of your screen, or the map, shows Vasco da Gama and his fleet of 4 ships sailing up the east coast of Africa towards India. One ship was a supply ship. That shows why it's burning at that stage. So they did manage to reach Calicut, and unfortunately, the Arab traders there were jealous and did not want to share their trade. So da Gama returned with only a few spices, but at least he proved that the route was viable all the way from Lisbon to India and back again. And of course, after subsequent voyages, it turned out that spices, which were traded on camels through the Middle East, could now be bought in bulk around the Cape of Good Hope to Lisbon. So we'll go to the next slide. And of course, here we learn that Lisbon replaces Venice as the entry port for spices into Europe. And it shows there some ship construction on one part of the coast and areas where spices could be unloaded in the commercial square. So King Manuel of Portugal became known as Manuel the Fortunate, or the Grocer King, and with the wealth of spices flowing into Europe through Venice, he was able to live like a Roman emperor, I guess you would say. Now, from there, the Portuguese from Calicut were able to capture Goa in 1509. And here we've got an image of the town of Goa with Portuguese traders already there, you can see in that image. And Goa became the headquarters for what the Portuguese called their Estado da India, and the beginning of what would be their trading empire across all of Asia. And the Portuguese retained occupation of Goa for the next 400 years or more, until it was captured by or seized by the Indians in 1961, which was not that long ago. Now from Goa, the Portuguese could reach Malacca, which then was the main entrepot for spices coming from across the Indonesian archipelago, and also goods coming from China. And the Portuguese said that whoever was the lord of Malacca had their hand on the throat of Venice. So that shows you how important Malacca was for trade. So now the Portuguese do have their hand on the throat of Venice. Now from there, we'll turn to a map. This is a 1732 map by Herman Moll, which shows the East Indies, and I've highlighted different cities there, but you can see where Malacca is located on the Malay Peninsula. And on the very eastern edge of the map, you can see the Spice Islands, which lie between New Guinea and what's there called the Celebes, or now Sulawesi in present time. So the Portuguese were now able to make a voyage to the Spice Islands along the north coast of Java, Bali, Lombok and the other islands, and then they would turn north to reach the Spice Islands. Now they had an advantage of this was the main regular trading route, and they had a Malay navigator with them that would take them on this journey to the Spice Islands. So let's look at a map from 1512 made by Francisco Rodrigues, who was the Portuguese navigator and chronicler on that voyage. So you can see this map would have been made from Malay maps, but if you look closely, you can recognize East Java, the island of Madura, Bali, Lombok, which actually has a recognizable name, and then the islands of Sumbawa, or islands of Sumbawa in this case. And the script there shows where one of the Portuguese ships, one of the three ships, actually struck a reef and sunk. So we'll turn to the next map, which shows the rest of the voyage. Again, somewhat confusing. The Portuguese were not great map makers. I'm certainly of that opinion. But on the very bottom left of that map is what the Portuguese call the Cabo de Flores, the Cape of Flowers, and that's how Flores got its name. And then a very confusing map of Ambon and Halmahera. So the only part of that map which I can certainly recognise is the Banda Islands, which is the 6 islands more or less in the middle right of the map. So unfortunately that is a bit confusing, but in 1512 they weren't great map makers. So let's go to the next slide, which shows that in 1512, as I said, the Portuguese reached the Spice Islands of Ternate, which are the Clove Islands, and reached an agreement with the Sultan of Ternate to build this Fort Gamalama in 1523. So on the left of your screen is a Dutch image of the remnants of Fort Gamalama, and on the right is a photo I took of the one of the few remaining walls that still stand. You can see the outline of the fort from the foundations, but that's not many walls that still stand. So let's go to the next slide, which is a map by Abraham Ortelius, 1584, Portuguese map of Asia. And I've inserted on that slide the development of the Portuguese trading empire, seaborne trading empire. So they reached Banda and Ternate in 1512, Ternate for cloves and Banda for nutmeg. They reached Timor and Solor in 1516 for sandalwood. Banten in 1516 again for pepper. Macau in 1517, obviously for Chinese silks and other Chinese goods. And Nagasaki in 1542 for Japanese silver. So this trading empire was to continue from 1511 right through until 1606, when the Dutch started to attack the Portuguese and reduce their influence across all of Asia. So let's go to the next map. Oh, okay. Let's go to the Spanish. So we'll follow the Spanish and their attempts to reach the Spice Islands, and of course, to do that, they have to sail across the Pacific. So we have an image here of Ferdinand Magellan, who was Portuguese. He was involved in the capture of Malacca, and his friend Francisco Serrao was the first Portuguese to reach Ternate and the Clove Islands. And on the other side of the screen is an image of the Victoria sailing across the Pacific, which we'll see later. So next we have a map by Jodocus Hondius, 1635, which shows Patagonia, Terra del Fuego, and of course the Straits of Magellan. Now Magellan had to stay over the winter and then put down a mutiny, but eventually he did find the Straits of Magellan and obviously was able to cross over through this very narrow strait into the Pacific Ocean. And we'll look next at a map of the Pacific Ocean. Sorry, we don't do that. We look at the Victoria, a replica of the Victoria, which is in the city of Ponta Arenas on the Straits of Magellan. So now we're in the Pacific. I really like this map because it shows how little was known before Balibo had sighted the Pacific from the summit of Panama, but very little else was known. And we can see the Magellan, where Magellan came through. Now, by this time, the Armada, which was 5 ships that had left Spain, was now down to 3 ships. One ship had been wrecked, another one had returned to Spain. And they thought that the Pacific Ocean would be a similar size to the Atlantic. Well, it's a lot bigger. You can see on this map the only two islands they discovered on their route across the Pacific. So by the time they reached the Philippines and Guam, most of the crew, almost all the crew, were suffering from scurvy, and some would have already died on the voyage. Of course, that green, all the green trees there would have been the clove trees that they were hoping to find at the end of their voyage. Now, as you probably know, well, there we go. There's another map from Abraham Ortelius, 1592, which shows the Victoria crossing the Pacific Ocean. And of interest here to us, I think, is that it shows New Guinea as an island, which of course the map was 1592, so Torres didn't sail through the straits and prove that it was an island until 1606. So that's sort of interest to all. So we'll go now to another map. No, yes, another map. So as you know, Magellan, or as I think you know, the Magellan was killed in the Philippines. And large key members of the crew were all killed as well. So now they only had enough crew to manage, or to man 2 ships. So one ship was burnt, and they continued on their voyage without the leadership of Magellan. So they wandered sort of without leadership for a number of months until they finally reached the Spice Islands, which is shown on the map on the other side of your screen. So we have here a map by Antonio Pigafetta, who was the chronicler of the voyage. And he published his book, Magellan's Voyage, in 1525. So this map of the island of Tidore and the other islands was published in that book. And of course, it also shows a clove tree, which was significant because that was the aim of their voyage. Now, to celebrate that voyage and them reaching the Spice Islands, we have here an image of the training ship of the Spanish Navy, the Juan Sebastian Delcano, which erected this memorial on the island of Tidore in Spanish, Indonesian, and English. So here's the English version. So in memory of Juan Sebastian Delcano and the crew of the ships Trinidad and Victoria, who landed in this island of Tidore on November the 8th, 1521, and set out on its course to Spain on a date in December the 18th of that same year, to accomplish what was the first circumnavigation of the globe. So an extremely historic voyage, and obviously the greatest voyage in maritime history. And this map by Battista Agnesi, 1544, shows the voyage of the Victoria, which completed the first circumnavigation of the world when it returned to Spain in 1522. So you remember they left in 1519. So it took roughly 3 years. And the map shows the voyage through the Straits of Magellan, across the Pacific to the Spice Islands, and then returning around the Cape of Good Hope to Spain. Now, what's significant is of the 5 vessels of the Armada de Moluccas that left Spain, and 247 men, only one vessel, the Pacific, actually returned to Spain with only 18 men that survived the voyage from the Spice Islands. So 60 men had left the Spice Islands and only 18 lived to return to Spain. So this is the first navigation memorial in San Lucar de Barrameda, which just shows the 5 ships: Trinidad, San Antonio, Conception, Victoria, and Santiago, and of course the men of the Victoria after their return to Spain, paying homage at the church in Sanlúcar. And of course the map shows the extent of their voyage. So now both Portugal and Spain have reached the Spice Islands. The Portuguese are in their fort on Ternate, Gamalama, and supported by the Sultan of Ternate, face off against the island of Tidore, where the Spanish occupy Fort Morisco, which you can see there, and allied with the Sultan of Ternate. And both nations and both islands separated by only a few kilometres across the straits there between them. Now, what happened, of course, was that the Spanish found it technically impossible to support their fort on Tidore because it required crossing the Pacific, which they tried numerous times. So an agreement was reached. The Spanish eventually made an agreement with the Portuguese, which was the Treaty of Saragossa, in which, for a sum of money, 350,000 gold ducats, they relinquished their claim to the Spice Islands, or to all the Spice Islands. And the line of the Treaty of Tordesillas was eventually reached, decided to be at 135 degrees east from on the map. So in case you're interested in what the Spice Islands look like, here's an image of the island of Tidore from the island of Ternate, and you can see how close these islands are. And of course, the main volcano. Both islands, in fact, are volcanic. So the Treaty of Saragossa sets the line between the Portuguese and Spanish at 135 degrees east. Of course, the Portuguese are eventually defeated by the Dutch, and so we move to this map, of course, the Tasman map, which is in the Mitchell Library. And if you notice on the top of that map, there's a compass rose and a fleur de lis, and a line down the centre of the map, which is the 135-degree line, which separated Portugal from Spain, and now separates the Dutch Dutch half of the world, or the Dutch area of influence, from the Spanish area of influence. So the Dutch have recorded that on the Tasman map. So, of course, the Tasman map was to remain unchanged for 125 years until the arrival of Captain Cook on the east coast of Australia. And of course, Cook claimed the east coast and what he called New South Wales for King George III. Now, this map is from the Amsterdam City Hall, a marble map, also a marvellous map, 1746. And this is significant because you'll see the Dutch could have written or claimed, written Nova Hollandia all across Nova Hollandia or Terra Australis, and claimed all of the land. But in fact, they've limited their claim by the way that name is curved around to 135 degrees east. And so this is also what encouraged the British to use that dividing line for the dividing between division between New Holland and New South Wales, which you'll see on this map. So Matthew Flinders, from 1799 to 1803, circumnavigated Australia and completed this first, or made this first complete map of Australia. It shows New Holland and New South Wales, and the line at 135 degrees down the middle of the map. And the insert of the map on the left of your screen, of course, shows Dutch New Holland, the dividing line 135 degrees east, and New South Wales. So our world divided is now divided completely across Asia, and it has an important part of the history of Australia as well. So I'll complete the story there, and we have a legacy of the world divided from 1494 to 1814, and I thank you for your attention.